No copyright reserved. This movie may be copied and distributed freely. Our work at Palestra Media is made possible by your donations. If you like what we do, please feel free to donate.
So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen. Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system.
It is our defining moment. Many things will change forever. A new world will emerge, the contours of which are for us to both imagine and to draw. Many of us are pondering when things will return to normal. The short response is never.
The documentary Monopoly, Who Owns the World, highlighted an interesting aspect of the owner structure of the world's largest companies. There are several holding giants whose business model is to invest in other companies, which hold enormous shares and influence over all our publicly traded companies. They own everything, from big tech and food industry to everything else being manufactured and marketed. BlackRock and Vanguard are the largest of these holding giants. They control assets in every sector worth owning, and their shares are publicly visible in sources like Yahoo Finance. These holding giants are not just owners of global enterprises. They own complete industries and even seemingly competing companies, such as Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And maybe more relevant in this age, the whole pharmaceutical industry, including vaccine manufacturers Pfizer and Moderna. BlackRock and Vanguard are also major owners of other holding giants in international big finance, like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, who in turn also influence the companies in their respective portfolios. If anyone talks about big finance, these are the ones they mean. It is a nested ownership which lays the groundwork for a well-hidden dominance, where on the surface it looks like there is a myriad of competing businesses with different types of conflicting interests, when in fact, there is a monopoly-like ownership structure where BlackRock and Vanguard win regardless of which service is selected or what product is consumed. They are so large that concerns have been raised in American business sectors that at the current pace, there will be no meaningful shareholder meetings by 2040, because BlackRock and Vanguard will completely dominate all publicly traded companies. It's like playing a game of Monopoly, where one player already owns everything. How does this sort of power concentration affect our society? Imagine if somebody has unlimited money and controlled the world's richest companies. Is there anything or anyone they couldn't influence?
BlackRock and Vanguard work actively with corporate governance to steer their companies in a more politicized direction, with, for example, diversity targets based on ethnicity and sex. In Sweden, parts of the Swedish business sector have highlighted how the holding giants interfere with the operations and demand more widespread implementation of diversity in corporate boards as well as the companies at large.
BlackRock är en av Stockholmsbörsens största ägare och har varit tydliga med att man vill se mer mångfald i svenska bolagsstyrelser, bland annat vad gäller styrelseledamöters etniska bakgrund. Men nu får det jättelika amerikanska fondbolaget svidande kritik från AMF och Lannebo som menar att BlackRock inte förstår hur svensk bolagsstyrning fungerar och att det kan få förödande konsekvenser. Den här utvecklingen har gått fort och det är väldigt få som är faktiskt medvetna om att idag är BlackRock och deras kollega Vanguard tillsammans är de faktiskt den svenska börsens absolut största ägare.
Amra Balik, Manager of Corporate Governance in Europe at BlackRock.
Just like all companies that we have invested our customers' capital in, we hold Swedish companies responsible to make progress in diversity. It happens within the bounds of corporate governance and newly published guidelines for voting.
Balik clarifies.
Our reinforced focus on ethnic and gender diversity in corporate boards occurs in light of our possibility to act by voting against boards which do not show diversity in 2022.
BlackRock is the largest shareholder of the Stockholm stock market, and the corporate governance strategy is working. Swedish flagship companies like Ericsson were listed among the best workplaces for LGBTQ+ people. Investor is the second largest shareholder of the Stockholm stock market. But keep in mind that BlackRock and Vanguard are the biggest owners of Investor, after the Wallenberg family. Investor, like other holding companies, which BlackRock and Vanguard have a stake in, work actively to push the companies they own in the same sort of diversity direction. Their target is that by 2030, all companies within the investor sphere shall actively promote diversity of all dimensions.
What is truly Scandinavian?
Grattis!
Absolutely nothing.
Vi har fokuserat på intersektionaliteten och utmanar maktordningen. There is no such thing.
We're no better
than our Viking ancestors.
Absolutely nothing.
This, of course, has an impact. The owners don't only want to affect the company culture, but also affect society. Migration, diversity, and multiculturalism dissolve the borders, the national identity, and the local culture. There is no longer a clear us, and that facilitates the globalist agenda to which independent nations are an obstacle. They have divided to conquer. Simultaneously, globalists work to push climate alarmism. The climate issue is an international threat, which makes it easy to promote international solutions, meaning more globalism and supranationalism, where we give away more of our autonomy by being whipped into a frenzied fear of climate threat. Those who question and resist this agenda are demonized as climate deniers and for spreading disinformation and fake news by the mass media largely owned by the same international holding companies, the same ones being criticized. This can make it sound very scripted, even though they on the surface appear to be competing news agencies.
But we are concerned about the prevalent trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Amazon has transformed its operations in response to COVID-19 to protect employees and keep packages flowing.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy while still delivering those packages to your doorstep. The company is keeping its employees safe. The company is keeping its employees safe.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
The only way to be praised by the mainstream media is to play along with the globalist agenda. If you want to be a respected citizen and not be smeared, if you want to make any career worth the name, there are certain things you must not oppose. If you don't pay lip service to the diversity targets as well as the climate goals, it will be impossible to climb the corporate ladder at any company on the stock market.
The global big finance affects national as well as the international politics through their media ownership and through politicization of all their companies. But they also use other platforms to reach into the political elite. One such platform is the Bilderberg Group. Top politicians are called to yearly meetings with the financial elite, all kept very hush-hush.
Ser du ett problem med att man som folkvald politiker deltar i slutna sällskap där allmänheten inte har insyn i vad som ställs på programmet? Nej, det ser jag inte. Så det är inget demokratiproblem att folkvalda politiker deltar i bildvärmemötet till exempel som du har gjort?
Nej. Vi har till exempel riksdagens utskott stängda de också till exempel. Så att vi har ju mycket sånt. Svenska regeringens sammanträde är också slutna, de är inte öppna för allmänheten.
A few families dominate this sphere, such as the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. From Sweden, the Wallenbergs, with Marcus Wallenberg in the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. This is how Bilderberg member David Rockefeller expressed himself in his memoirs.
Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it.
The nation-state stands in the way of global big finance's vision of a borderless world under their direct influence. The same criticism against the nation also comes from a different platform, which also aims to bring together the global finance elite with our political representatives. World Economic Forum is a membership organization for global big finance, which aims to further its members' interests by being a platform which intersects all areas of society, so that the members reach politicians, intellectuals and other leaders to shape the global agenda.
Companies do pay to come here. They pay a lot actually, but when it comes to civil society, scholars, scientists, activists and the media, they come for free. Because healthy economies are about a lot more than big business. And we need diverse voices to make sure all sectors of society are involved in decision-making.
Klaus Schwab is chairman of the World Economic Forum and launched the concept of the Great Reset, which amounts to a total global social and economic restart in connection to the COVID pandemic. Klaus Schwab writes in his book with the same name, COVID-19, The Great Reset.
At first glance, the pandemic and the environment might seem to be only distantly related cousins, but they are much closer and more intertwined than we think. They are global in nature and therefore can only be properly addressed in a globally coordinated fashion.
The constantly recurring problem painted by Schwab is
the absence of global governance.
It is through focusing on and exaggerating borderless threats and creating fear of these threats which makes us hand over our autonomy. Their goal is that we will no longer be national citizens in different countries, but global citizens under global governance. It is not out of the question the reason the World Economic Forum did not launch the Great Reset in connection to the climate hysteria was that we were never afraid enough to agree to the coercive measures required by this big reset. However, they did succeed in fanning the fear needed during COVID-19, making COVID-19 a possible pretext for the Great Reset.
Some leaders and decision makers who were already at the forefront of the fight against climate change may want to take advantage of the shock inflicted by the pandemic to implement long-lasting and wider environmental changes. They will, in effect, make good use of the pandemic by not letting the crisis go to waste.
Now is the historical moment, the time.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
It is an opportunity we have never had before and may never have again.
We must not miss this unique window of opportunity.
Unlike the Bilderberg Group, World Economic Forum is a more open platform where the agenda is being promoted externally. For them, it's about controlling the narrative. They need to be in control of the story being presented to the people of the world.
We are here to develop the great narrative, a story for the future. We will look how we imagine, how we decide, how we execute the great narratives, how we define the story of our world for the future.
The narrative is that COVID-19 is a gigantic window of opportunity to implement the Great Reset. It is not about exiting the pandemic into what we would consider normal, but creating a new normal, which starts with this reset. Thereby, the measures taken with restrictions, lockdowns, and vaccine passports are not to be seen as an exit strategy from the pandemic, but as an entry strategy into a new normal, dramatically different to what was before.
The pandemic gives us this chance. It represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world.
Really to create a great narrative for humankind.
Many of us are pondering when things will return to normal. The short response is never.
That these measures implemented by the World Economic Forum and their partners are not about our health becomes abundantly clear in how Schwab describes COVID-19 in his book.
The corona crisis is one of the least deadly pandemics the world has experienced over the last 2,000 years. The consequences of COVID-19 in terms of health and mortality will be mild compared to previous pandemics. It does not constitute an existential threat or a shock that will leave its imprint on the world's population for decades.
Something that will have an imprint on the people of the world within the foreseeable future, however, are the permanent changes that the World Economic Forum want to implement.
The societal upheaval unleashed by COVID-19 will last for years and possibly generations.
When the World Health Organization declares a pandemic, it has far-reaching consequences. The reason that a disease that is not very severe is still classified as a pandemic is because the World Health Organization in 2009 changed its definition of a pandemic. They removed the requirement of excess mortality in order to classify the swine flu as a pandemic.
Det gäller skräcken för den så kallade svininfluensan som nu sprider sig över världen. Frågan är hur befogad den skräcken är och om det verkligen handlar om en pandemi. När W.h.o kallar en smitta för pandemi så får det långtgående konsekvenser både för samhällsinstitutioner och företag. Men ansedda forskare ifrågasätter nu själva pandemibegreppet och även den planerade massvaccineringen. För en stund sedan pratade jag med en oberoende forskare knuten till det högt ansedda Cochrane-institutet som utvärderar olika behandlingsmetoder. En forskare som är mycket kritisk till larmet som går över världen.
This one seems to be a pretty mild form of disease, so I'm not sure that I understand all this worry, but there may be good reasons for it.
But now you say it's not serious, but in Sweden, for example, we prepare for mass vaccinations. Isn't that necessary, according to you?
Vaccination in a pandemic, or so-called pandemic vaccines, well, we never know whether they'll work, because, of course, there is no target virus to test the vaccine against, usually. Pandemic vaccines and other vaccines are registered before the virus is around. And so it's a gamble whether these vaccines will work. What the evidence shows from the hundreds of studies that we have reviewed is that these vaccines have got a performance which is not very good, and they work best in healthy adults, i.e. those who've got good immune systems in the first place, and for which they usually are not recommended.
But you give one picture here of this flu not being so serious, but the W.h.o gives another picture and they call it a pandemic. What do you say about calling this flu a pandemic?
Well, it's a good point. I don't understand what a pandemic is anymore. And the reason for that is as follows. In 2003, W.h.o described an influenza pandemic as follows. An influenza pandemic occurs when a new influenza virus appears against which the human population has no immunity, resulting in several simultaneous epidemics worldwide with enormous numbers of deaths and illness. Sometime in May 2009, this definition changed as follows. An influenza pandemic may occur when a new influenza virus appears against which the human population has no immunity. In other words, what they've done is they've taken out the part that referred to simultaneous outbreaks, high morbidity, that's a very high number of severe cases, and mortality. So now this definition, this 2009 definition, could very well fit seasonal influenza. So I don't understand what the difference is anymore.
But who is gaining this from this altered definition of a pandemic?
Oh, the new definition lowers the threshold. It makes a pandemic now and possibly a pandemic going on for some time. And it obviously favors those who have to sell products, including research, of course. Let's not forget. And the media, as well as the pharmaceutical industry.
On Friday, I announced that Canada will provide $440 million to the COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access Facility, including $220 million to the Advanced Market Commitment to help low and middle-income countries access vaccines. This is an important initiative, and I encourage other governments to join in as well. We need to work together.
What did Pfizer do before COVID, Meg? Add that up, the vaccine and the Paxlovid, what does that add up to? Is that $50 billion?
Yeah, 32 plus 22.
Are you kidding me?
That's a lot of money.
What? And you said 99 total.
Yeah, 98 to 102 is their forecast for the year.
It's actually really straightforward. If you've got a vaccine pass, you can do everything. Basically, that's it.
How we can encourage and potentially think about mandatory vaccination.
Get as many people vaccinated across the country as humanly possible.
Därför vill jag också inskärpa allvaret hos dig som ännu inte är vaccinerad.
For unvaccinated, we are looking at a winter of severe illness and death for unvaccinated.
For the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death. For yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm.
If you are anti-mandate, you are absolutely anti-vax. I don't care what your personal vaccination status is. If you support, champion, give a green light, give comfort to, support anybody who argues against the vaccine, you are an anti-vaxxer. Absolutely. Your personal vaccination status is utterly irrelevant. And if you are out there in any way, shape or form campaigning against this mandate, you are absolutely anti-vax. If you say pro-persuasion, stuff it, shove it. We are absolutely going to make sure as many Territorians as possible are vaccinated. That is our best protection against this thing.
You're going to be able to get your vaccine as soon as you turn 5. And I know you're excited and I know you're eager. In some places across the country, you can even start making your appointment now for shortly after your birth.
This is not about freedom or personal choice.
If your child is 5 years of age and older, please get them vaccinated. We need to protect the children.
50 million planned doses scrapped after triggering false positive results for HIV.
As in science, things don't always go right. It's certainly a tough day for the team.
The W.h.o vaccine applied a molecular clamp closing the coronavirus spikes using an HIV protein which falsely triggered infection markers. Vaccine expert Professor Nikolai Petrovsky says he raised the alarm early.
Our feeling was it was too experimental a technology to be rolled out.
It isn't only the definitions of pandemic and anti-vaxxer which have changed. Even vaccine has been redefined.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick, and that it's not just in the clinical trials, but it's also in real-world data.
Now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else.
Vaccines prevent getting infected, prevent getting sick, prevent your hospitalization.
This was the promise, which they failed to deliver, as the vaccinated could still spread the infection. Pfizer's CEO announced this January that they will make a new attempt, a vaccine 1.1, which will be released in March.
And we know that the 2 doses of the vaccine offer very limited protection, if any. Now, we are working on a new version of our vaccine, the 1.1, let me put it that way, that will cover Omicron as well. And of course, we are waiting to have the final results. The vaccine will be ready in March.
The CDC, the Public Health Agency of the United States, changed their definition of vaccine at the end of 2021. from being something that gave immunity to disease to instead being something that stimulates an immune system response to a disease. The W.h.o, in connection to COVID-19, changed their definition of herd immunity by removing the statement that herd immunity can be achieved through natural immunity after being exposed to the disease, to instead only being a consequence of vaccination.
Herd immunity is achieved by protecting people from a virus, not by exposing them to it.
These definitions have changed in order to manipulate reality. The largest funder of the W.h.o is Bill Gates. Gates is also closely connected to the World Economic Forum. With one hand, Gates receives tax breaks for the money he transfers to his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which in turn can forward the tax-exempt money to the W.h.o. With the other hand, Gates invests in the pharmaceutical industry and vaccines.
You've invested $10 billion in vaccinations over the last 2 decades, and you figured out the return on investment for that, and it kind of stunned me. Can you walk us through the math?
But we feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else.
I think the numbers that you ran through were if you had put that money into an S&P 500 and reinvested the dividends, you'd come up with something like $17 billion, but you think it's $200 billion.
Here, yeah. You know, helping young children live, get the right nutrition, contribute to their countries, that has a payback that goes beyond any typical financial return.
Right.
When the W.h.o declares a pandemic and urges the world to get vaccinated, it's Gates' best investment ever, all disguised as philanthropy. The large global companies have become incomprehensibly richer during the pandemic years. All while the pandemic measures have smashed the economy for the average citizen in the worst-hit countries.
During a crisis, a window of opportunity for policy changes is created. This is true regardless if the crisis is fabricated, as is the case with COVID-19. The whole crisis rests on the decision by WHO to declare a pandemic, but that wouldn't have happened before 2009. In that case, COVID-19 would have only been classified as a severe seasonal flu and would have been handled as such. But today, it is instead a pandemic, and it's being treated as if it was the most dangerous pandemic we have ever had. The reach of the measures have taken no historical counterpart. This window of opportunity for the people in power makes it possible for them to introduce policies which they never could have introduced otherwise. They are using this crisis as a pretext to implement new rules and protocols, so that when we leave the crisis and look for an exit, we will leave the old normal behind and instead enter a new normal, where the implemented changes live on.
It is our defining moment. Many things will change forever. A new world will emerge, the contours of which are for us to both imagine and to draw.
The vision Schwab and the World Economic Forum have of how the Great Reset will reshape our world is so far-reaching, they have to compare it to the impact of World War II.
World War II could even so be one of the most relevant mental anchors in the effort to assess what's coming next. World War II was the quintessential transformational war, triggering not only fundamental changes to the global order and the global economy, but also entailing radical shifts in societal attitudes and beliefs that eventually paved the way for radically new policies and social contract provisions. The magnitude of their transformative power is comparable. Both have the potential to be a transformative crisis of previously unimaginable proportions.
COVID-19 is used as a stepping stone to implement the largest and most extensive changes ever, having no historical counterpart, and the closest comparison is the global and social changes after World War II.
It's a tremendous responsibility which we have. There is no other way. We have to live up to the expectations which we have created, and we will do so.
The Great Reset means, according to the World Economic Forum, that we should build back better. The leading politicians that have implemented the harshest COVID restrictions are not just members of the World Economic Forum, but they have also been trained by them through their program, Young Global Leaders.
What we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, so that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Chrystia Friedland is not just Trudeau's Deputy Prime Minister, she is also on the Board of Trustees, together with Klaus Schwab, in the World Economic Forum.
I really believe COVID has created a window of political opportunity and maybe an epiphany.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now. Mm-hmm. I'm here with the president, who is a young global leader.
And they all use the centrally agreed catchphrase, Build Back Better, as part of the Great Reset.
Build back better from the COVID crisis.
Build it back better.
To come back stronger and build back better.
Build Canada back better.
You know what Donald Trump will do with 4 more years? Blame, bully, and belittle. And you know what Joe Biden will do? Build back better.
It's the beginning of a global mobilization effort to rally our forces behind this Great Reset initiative.
Build back, and we're going to build back better. We can't just build back, we got to build back better.
Now is the time to start building back better.
History would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset.
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world. All elements of the Great Reset are fundamental to building the future we need.
Sweden is ready to do its part.
To build back better or whatever.
Build back better.
In this time of coronavirus. It's certainly a major crisis, but it also offers us a unique opportunity. Now is the time to make the changes we need to build a climate-resilient world, but also to build back better.
The launch of the Great Reset was preceded by a long string of meetings and correspondence between World Economic Forum and our political leaders. The Dutch authorities have publicly disclosed parts of the correspondence between their Prime Minister, Finance Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister with Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum.
Dear Minister, the discussions will focus on shaping policies for the post-COVID-19 era under the theme of the Great Reset. The Forum will work with your staff to ensure that your participation becomes a major force in shaping the Great Reset. I look forward to welcoming you in Davos.
Klaus Schwab also sent his book, The Great Reset, to the Dutch Prime Minister, who replied that the book gives a hopeful analysis of a better future.
Dear Professor Schwab, your book provides us a worrying, thus hopeful analysis for a better future.
Mark Rutte, Prime Minister of the Netherlands, denied any knowledge of the Great Reset when confronted about it in the Dutch Parliament.
Voorzitter, steeds meer mensen zien dat het een grote leugen is dat het huidige coronabeleid ertoe dient om onze volksgezondheid te beschermen. Maar dat roept natuurlijk wel de vraag op waarom dan al die afschuwelijke maatregelen worden getroffen die onze hele manier van leven, onze hele samenleving kapot maken. Nu zijn er een aantal invloedrijke globalisten die naar eigen zeggen de coronacrisis zien als een enorme kans om onze wereld te resetten en dus een pervers belang hebben om deze crisis nog even voor te laten duren. En een van deze globalisten is de heer Klaus Schwab, oprichter en voorzitter van het World Economic Forum. En hij heeft ook een boek geschreven met als pakkende titel COVID-19, The Great Reset. En mijn vraag aan de demissionair minister-president is: hoe beoordeelt hij de inhoud van dit boek?
De minister-president.
Ik ken het boek niet, voorzitter. Maar ik zou de heer Vermeijeren willen adviseren om niet
al te veel in al die conspiracy-theorieën. Ik kijk ze ook allemaal op YouTube. Ik vind het altijd fascinerend hoe dan uitgelegd wordt dat 9/11 niet heeft plaatsgevonden of dat het allemaal anders zit. Ontzettend knap in elkaar gezet. Maar het is meestal wat het is, een conspiracy-theorie.
De heer Van Meijeren.
Nou, het verbaast mij dat de eerste vraag die ik aan de heer Rutte stel sinds ik beëdigd ben als Kamerlid direct wordt beantwoord. Dank u wel, maar het verbaast mij dat die eerste vraag direct wordt beantwoord met een leugen. Ik heb namelijk een brief in mijn hand die dateert van 26 november 2020. En dat is een brief van de heer Rutte aan de heer Klaus Schwab, waarin hij de heer Schwab bedankt voor het toezenden van zijn boek. En dit noemt een hoopvolle analyse voor een betere toekomst. Zou de heer Rutte nog even kunnen graven in zijn geheugen? Het is nog geen half jaar geleden, dus ik weet niet hoe lang uw herinneringen actief blijven. Maar waarschijnlijk is dit nog wel ergens op te graven. En mijn eerste vraag opnieuw te beantwoorden en nu eerlijk, alstublieft.
Nou, het eerlijke antwoord is dat dat een nette brief is. Waarin je helaas niet alle boeken die je toegestuurd krijgt van kaft tot kaft kunt lezen. Maar wel degene die je toestuurt een vriendelijke brief wil terugsturen.
Nou, dan zegt de heer Rutte dus eigenlijk dat hij niet heeft gelogen tegen mij, maar tegen de heer Klaus Schwab.
The vision of the Great Reset is that we will leave our old ways behind and enter a new era, one which entails what Schwab calls stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism means that global companies should not only attend to their own business, but must also take a holistic responsibility for all parts of society, with an emphasis on social justice, no matter national borders.
We've reached a human crisis unlike any that we've experienced in the last 75 years.
Meaning one side has too much, the other side will oppose it.
We've done a lot of things to create the imbalances that we have today.
COVID-19 has laid bare the systemic social inequities. Addressing these larger problems must become our priority.
We have to make sure that the economy actually works for the people.
It's not just about growth for growth's sake, but how we share that prosperity.
The most important tools are education and technology.
We are one community. We have to remember that.
The Dutch Prime Minister praises that vision in the same correspondence with the World Economic Forum.
My good friend Professor Schwab outlines an inspiring way forward in making the global economy more equitable, sustainable and future-proof. A vision that fits in perfectly with all his efforts over the years to build a better world. Once again, Professor Schwab gives us food for thought and reflection with this fascinating book. Mark Rutte, Prime Minister of the Netherlands.
In short, we need a great reset.
This undeniably raises the overarching question of whose interests our politicians represent when they talk of this big reset.
Hundratals miljarder av svenska skattemedel har under hans tid vid makten skänkts bort till internationella organisationer och andra stater. I många fall med oklara syften eller utan mätbar effekt. Nu när han lämnar posten som statsminister har han gjort klart att nästa steg i karriären blir utanför landets gränser. Kanske i någon av de organisationer han gett miljarder av svenska skattemedel. I vilken omfattning tror Stefan Löfven att hans givmildhet med våra skattemedel har krattat manegen för hans framtida karriär? Tack.
Tack, statsministern.
Tack, herr talman. Alltså den nivån på frågor är ju bara för bedrövlig. Vad vet du överhuvudtaget om detta? Jag kan säga till dig, jag har inga planer, konkreta planer vad jag ska göra. Jag tänker ta mig tid. Och jag betackar mig faktiskt också från sådana spekulationer. Jag tänker faktiskt inte ens besvara det. Det är för låg nivå. Ursäkta mig.
All elements of the Great Reset are fundamental to building the future we need.
Sweden is ready to do its part.
All this under global leadership, where Schwab's sponsors and international big finance take a special position in their exercise of public authority through their companies, something Schwab refers to as stakeholder capitalism, where focus is moved from maximizing profit for their companies to a broader social engagement with emphasis on sustainability, diversity, and social justice. That is completely in line with Agenda 2030. In other words, Schwab's concept of stakeholder capitalism means that the global companies will take on responsibility of what we normally would consider political issues. What we would usually decide in elections would in this scenario be taken over by anonymously holding giants we neither elected nor have any insight into. This reminds me of Ronald Reagan's classic quote about the most terrifying words in the English language.
The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
Building back better means getting support to the most vulnerable while maintaining our momentum on reaching the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs. Canada is here to listen and to help.
The updated version of this quote would be, "I'm from a global company with an anonymous leadership, and I'm here to help." The vaccine is the help we receive, and the vaccine is an important component for this global reset, because the vaccine leads to vaccine passports, which leads to extended digital infrastructure with a digital ID that connects our whole person, or whole earthly being, with a single QR code.
A region in China has already introduced a digital ID, which is connected to a social credit score, where the state decides what you can and cannot do, depending on whether you've been a good citizen who is a benefit to the collective.
Everywhere she goes, W.h.o is followed. What she buys, how she behaves, is tracked and scored to show how responsible and trustworthy she is. It's called the social credit system, and in one version now being tested, a person's reputation is scored on a scale of 350 to 950. And W.h.o, with a good score of 752, is okay with it. In fact, most people are, and few here are willing to criticize it. Something that may pose a risk itself for a bad score and the life that comes with it.
Journalist W.h.o. He got a little too close to uncovering corruption among high-profile party members. After being sued for defamation by the subject of a story he'd written, he was blacklisted. But he only realized when he tried to buy a train ticket and was told he was banned from traveling.
That tells me I'm still on the blacklist.
Punished because he's been branded untrustworthy by the state.
Once you're blacklisted, you can no longer get a bank loan, start a business, buy an apartment, or even send your children to a private school.
In theory, everything can be taken into account in the social score.
World Economic Forum wants a global citizenship under global leadership, where people are controlled through a digital ID, which reflects, amongst others, your health status, which illnesses you have, what care you have received, and which vaccines you have taken. The digital ID will also constitute your new digital wallet with a digital currency and will replace your passport if you travel.
Und aus diesem Grund wird die Kommission demnächst eine sichere europäische digitale Identität vorschlagen. Eine Technologie, bei der wir selbst kontrollieren können, welche Daten ausgetauscht und wie sie verwendet werden.
The digital ID will be a prerequisite to connect to the public infrastructure, controlled centrally. If such a digital ID is introduced, the rulers can shut down whoever they want, whenever they want, from all of society all over the world, just by limiting that person's QR code. And they will also be able to punish anyone who interacts with the targeted individual in the same way, as the digital ID is also traceable.
If they fail in introducing a digital ID in connection with the crisis, there are always new crises around the corner to justify the introduction of such a digital ID.
For a potential cyber pandemic.
The COVID-19 pandemic has shaken our economies and societies to the core and shown us how vulnerable we are to biological threats. In the digital world, similar risks are being overlooked right now. A cyber attack with COVID-like characteristics would spread faster and further than any biological virus. Its reproductive rate would be around 10 times greater than what we've experienced with the coronavirus. Fortunately, at least until now, cyber attacks have not impacted our health the way pandemics have, but the economic damages, and therefore the impact they have had on our daily lives, have been equal and sometimes even greater. You see, the only way to stop the exponential propagation of a COVID-like cyber threat is to fully disconnect the millions of vulnerable devices from one another and from the internet. All of this in a matter of days.
To reconnect to the internet, A digital ID will be needed to ensure you are not carrying the virus, just like you needed a vaccine passport to reconnect to the social infrastructure during COVID.
The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack.
The measures we have seen with lockdowns and vaccine passports are not a strategy for our health, for these so-called solutions are worse than the disease. The measures are for hurting us towards the new normal.
Something like 1984 could actually happen. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time.
Aujourd'hui, au bout de ça, on parle de puces qu'on pourra s'implanter. Ce sera quand ça?
Certainement dans les 10 années à venir. Et après, on pourrait s'imaginer qu'on les implante dans nos cerveaux ou dans notre peau. Et à la fin, peut-être il y a une communication directe entre notre cerveau et le monde digital. Ce que nous voyons, c'est une sorte de fusion du monde physique, digital et biologique.
There is no digital without chips, and the European need for chips will double in the next decade.
I just would like to highlight what you said about the European Chips Act, because it's an important step to create the physical brain for digitalization and to have it located to a certain extent in Europe.
And today, most of our supplies come from a handful of producers outside Europe. And this is a dependency and uncertainty we simply cannot afford.
There will be no loyalty except loyalty to the party. But always there will be the intoxication of power. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
Is it possible to prevent the next pandemic?
Yes, if every country does what Australia did, then you wouldn't be calling it a pandemic. That's all.
We are grateful for the support of about 20 ADF personnel as well as army trucks to assist with the transfer of positive cases and close contacts.
If I cross that yellow line, that I've broken the rule, I will be issued with a $5,000 fine.
That's correct.
Right.
We could even do that now, but we're giving the warning first. Have a chat with you because the big fine, rather just do the right thing, yeah?
So what did that experience make you think? Like what was your feeling about being in that situation with those people in control of your every movement?
Oh, it's horrible. It's a horrible feeling. You feel like you're in prison. You feel like you've done something wrong. It's inhumane what they're doing. Like you are so small. They just overpower you and you're literally nothing.